Fantastic. So we are pleased and honored to be joined today by Jessica Gordon Nembhard and Dr. Assata Richards. And I'm honored to be introducing them to y'all today. So Dr. Jessica Gordon Nembhard is a PhD, is a professor of community justice and social economic development in the Department of Africana Studies at the John Jay College of the City University of New York. Dr. Gordon Nembhard is an internationally recognized and widely published political economist who specializes in cooperative economics, community economic development, and community-based asset building, alongside racial wealth inequality, economics, Black political economy, and community-based approaches to justice. Gordon Nembhard earned a PhD and a master's in economics from the University of Massachusetts Amherst in 1992 and 1989, respectively. She earned her bachelor's magna cum laude in literature and African American studies from Yale, as well as a master's in elementary curriculum and teaching from Howard. She's the proud mother of two children, Stephen and Susan, and two grandsons, Stefan and Hugo Nembhard. Dr. Assata Richards will be in conversation with Dr. Gordon Nembhard today. Is a native of Houston, Texas, and received much of her education in East Texas in the community known as County Line. After completing her bachelor's degree from the University of Houston, she earned a master's and PhD from Pennsylvania State University in sociology with a concentration on political and community participation, as well as research methods and Oh, I'm just catching this in the chat that you have 4 grandchildren now. Congratulations. Amazing to hear, Dr. Nembhard. Um, so Dr. Richards, after serving as faculty member at the University of Pittsburgh, returned to her community of the Third Ward in Houston, Texas, where she is living and working with Project Grow Houses and serving as an adjunct professor at the University of Houston. She is also a member of We Are the Ones, is based in Houston, Texas, which is one of Ujima's translocal partners. As a scholar and community organizer, she's fulfilling her lifelong commitment to social change and justice. She also serves as the vice chair of the Board of Commissioners for the Houston Housing Authority as an appointee of Mayor Anise Parker. And with that, I would love to turn this conversation over to you both. Thank you again for joining us. We're in for an exciting 30 minutes.
Thank you, thank you. And I just want to say that's an old bio. So I don't work with Project Grow Houses anymore, and I'm not on the board of the Houston Community, the Houston Housing Authority, but I am the founding board member of the Houston Community Land Trust. So I will give that update. So thank you, Boston Ujima. This is an exciting opportunity, and of course, I am just beyond honored to be in conversation with Dr. Jessica, who is, really a Northern Star for so many of us in this work. And so this is a beautiful moment, and I learned so much about Dr. Jessica and her 2 children and 4 grandchildren. So I'm really delighted that I'm learning these nuggets. And so I'm just going to lean into this conversation and say that as the context has been set, this month, Boston Ujima has really been focusing and centering Black utopias. And oh, wow, don't we really need to be thinking about Black utopias with so much of what we're dealing with? So I think this is a great month, and under the leadership of Boston Ujima, maybe imagining we need to be thinking of utopias in the month of November. And they've been centering on the practice of Black utopia and dreaming. So Dr. Jessica, this ideal of Black utopian and dreaming, just thinking about your work, your past work, your present work, and your future work, how do these concepts resonate with you around visioning and the work that you're doing to really, again, be a Northern Star for this wave of resurgence of Black cooperation?
Thank you so much for the question. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks, everybody. Also, just quick acknowledgments to the stewards of the land, to our ancestors, and to Mother Earth. So, it's interesting that you put this question, right? Economists, we tend not to dream, right? we're usually like the ones that are supposed to be so grounded, right, and so realistic. In fact, we're called the dismal science, right? Economics is considered to be the dismal science. And so when I got into the field of economics, and especially into community economic development and community economics, I realized that I could not make a career based on the dismal science and just looking at what was wrong all the time, especially when through the lens of Black political economy, when we're looking at how Black people fare under racial capitalism and white supremacy, we don't do too well. And so the stories are always bad. We're always 2 times more this and 10 times less that. And I was trying to find ways to not look at the world so dismally. And so I focused on community-based economic development, community asset building, and eventually cooperatives and solidarity economics. And as I studied those things, I suddenly saw the light, right? The light at the end of the tunnel. I saw histories and practices of people who said, okay, I might be in the worst condition that a human being can be in, like enslaved and beaten and whatever, but I can dream about and then work toward those dreams about how to be a human being and how to do something as a human being and how to resist the dehumanizing, brutalizing effects and traumatizing effects of my experience with racial capitalism, right? And the more I studied the history of Black American cooperatives, and economic, well, first I was calling alternatives, but now I call it more of economic resistance and economic solidarity, right? I realized that most of the examples that I found started with people. I used to talk about it, all right, until today, I talked about it. It started with like study groups and learning together, right? Bringing people together and saying, let's understand better what's happening, what conditions we're in, and then let's understand how we can get out of them and what we can do to live life differently. And so we studied together and learned together. But now that you're asking me this question about dreaming, right, it was also a way to dream together, right? Whatever condition we're in, whether we're enslaved, whether it's the Great Depression in the 30s, whether it's police brutality in the 60s or in the 2020s, right? We come together, we talk about there's got to be a different way. We can get to that way by working together and dreaming together. But we're not just going to dream, we're going to figure out how to make our dreams happen. And for me, that kind of lifted me out of the whole dismal science to this joyful, humane, solidarity way to try to understand the world and how people, again, the most oppressed and downtrodden and abused people actually create and recreate themselves as human beings, both spiritually and economically. And just to bring us to the more of the present, I also see that when I've been studying incarcerated worker co-ops. So these are worker co-ops owned by people who are incarcerated while they're still behind bars. And the interviews that I was able to do with worker owners in prisons in Puerto Rico, I kept asking them about the economics, right? Was the job, the work better? Did you make more money in the co-op and whatever? They wanted to talk to me about spiritual transformation and how being in a co-op allowed them to actually be human beings, change their relationship to themselves, to their families, to other people, and regain their humanity.
Thanks for that. And I want to add, I think that an extension of academia and research, right? You make a name for yourself by finding out what's wrong, right? Like, and you talk about what's wrong, and you get less prestige when you talk about solutions. In fact, they call that applied research. And I never forget when I left the academy and people would ask me what I was doing, and they'd be, oh, that's applied research. And I could see them like lose interest, right? Because I wasn't doing something theoretical philosophical. So I think it's often hard for us who've been educated to move beyond the problem, because we get so much credit and attention by just talking about what's wrong. Um, um, and I also want to say, from the perspective, my PhD was actually, my dissertation was in social movement. That was my concentration, was social movements. And one of the things I think uh, some of our activists have struggled with too, right, is really focusing on the problem, police brutality. And that makes sense because we're always reacting to the conditions. And so we find ourselves always on the defense and never really on the offense, right? And so I would just add, for me, it became the thing that I could control, living in a neighborhood that's being gentrified or attempted to be gentrified, so many things outside of our control. And when so many people told us no, like, no, we're not going to fund community wealth building. No, we're not going to fund anchor partnerships. No, we'll do everything but that. The co-ops was within our sphere of control. It was something we could do for ourselves. It was something that we could do to actualize our own aspirations for ourselves and for our community. And it gave us a sense that we were more than this set of oppression and circumstances. And I think, as Brother Maha from Dayton, Ohio would say, I think our visioning and our dreaming is part of our ancient technologies. And I'll close this and go to the next question. I'll never forget when the first election of the current elected president, my grandmother was still living, and we were sitting in the house that I grew up in. And I was like, oh, grandmother, do you see? And my grandmother rolled over on that bed and said, I am going to sleep because we're going to do tomorrow what we did today and what we did yesterday. We're going to go on and find a way. And I'll never forget that. And I thought, my grandmother has seen some stuff, and she knows that we just go on and make new possibilities for ourselves. So thank you for that. This understanding of visioning and work. Now, leaning into more, as you talked about your research, and the bedrock of your research, in terms of the Black political economy. And I want to ask you, and so many people are talking about Black women. And I think it's dangerous to talk about Black women as a group or an ideology or even a paradigm, right? So what I think is a more hopeful conversation to talk about is Black feminist principles, and how they relate to our understanding of cooperative economics or the work that you're doing. And I just want to be, honest and say I didn't meet Black feminism until I was way out of graduate school. I was the person that was going to go to University of Michigan and learn all the research methods, multi-level analysis, all the research methods, because I thought that's what I needed, was the hard sciences and the paradigms. I could figure those out. But your work has really lifted up Black feminism and feminist principles. Tell us why that's important, and tell us, what do you think the role of Black women collectively in movements, but also in cooperatives, in the cooperative movement, can tell us and help us figure out where we are and give us some new directions.
That's a lot. Let's see if I can live up to your question. So I think the way to start is that I was surprised when I started doing this research on the history of Black co-ops to find such a strong role for Black women in the co-op movement, in actually starting with the mutual aid movement. And I think the reason why I was surprised was because, again, we don't just live in racial capitalism, we live in a patriarchal world, right? Where we assume that everything is about men, that men are the leaders, women are the followers, right? We kind of mutter under our breath that women do all the scud work and don't get the credit, but somehow we don't really, when we look for trends, we look for leaders or whatever, we're not always looking for women. But once you start getting into the work, especially actually even just community development, not just co-ops and mutual aid, but when you start looking at community development and what's happening at the community levels, even if the so-called leaders or the face of stuff is the men, the women are really the ones who are doing most of the work. They're the ones who bring people together, who lead a lot of the study groups, who keep everybody organized, who keep everybody on point, who pull everybody together, who understand and see easily what people's strengths are and push them toward those strengths. So as I was looking at all these examples of Black women first running mutual aid societies, sometimes huge complexes of mutual aid societies, running co-ops, starting co-ops, organizing sometimes women-only co-ops. And especially I was trying to look at it sort of in the rest of the co-op world, and most of the rest of the co-op world, especially in Europe and Asia and white folks in North America, they were all complaining that women didn't have much roles in co-ops. And I was like, okay, well, that's weird, because in the Black co-ops, the women, in some ways were running things. Not totally, but, like even, Young Negroes Cooperative League, the president was a Black man, but the woman who ran everything, and we have most of the records from, was Ella Baker as the executive director of it, right? We've got Nanny Helen Burroughs doing co-op stuff in the 30s. We've got Helena Wilson from the Ladies Auxiliary of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters doing study groups and trying to get the porters to start co-ops and understand why co-ops are necessary and why co-ops and labor go together. We have Fannie Lou Hamer, right? Learning that voting rights isn't enough, that, that the white supremacists use food as a weapon and use the fact that we need jobs and need a place to live and need land as a weapon to stop us from getting the rights that we need. And so we have to first start with co-op ownership and co-op farming and running our own businesses and things. So all through the histories, I even found a connection of Harriet Tubman to co-ops, right? That when she was a scout during the Civil War, right, she convinced the Union Army to go liberate the plantations along the Combahee River in South Carolina, where the Gullah people were. And after she liberated those lands, most of the Black men joined the Union Army to continue to fight. All the Confederates and their families left, and the women were left there. Women, children, and elderly were left on these abandoned plantations, and they took over. They ran the plantations, they farmed, they made crafts work, and for the rest of the Civil War, they had their own little co-op community that they ran, because a Black woman helped to make sure their land was liberated, and they just jumped in, filled in, and took over from there. So, any place we look, you can see this power. And you asked me about the principles. So for me, the other piece is the principles of feminism, Black feminism and womanism, right? Is this understanding, one, of the power of women, that we're not Adam's rib from Adam's rib, or some, right, auxiliary or lesser, right? That we're leaders, we're powerful, but also this notion of understanding community and caring work, right? And valuing community and caring work. Because again, traumatizing, exploitative capitalism, right, doesn't count caring work as having any value. It doesn't care about how we reproduce ourselves as human beings. In fact, it just wants us to reproduce ourselves as workers for them, to make profits for them. But feminism, Black feminism, makes sure that we see what really matters to human beings, puts the humanism, the human being, back into the systems. So it makes sure that we value invisible work, that we value caring work, that we value what we call social reproduction, human beings reproducing themselves and surviving, right? We value sustainability, right? Taking care of Mother Earth, stewarding Mother Earth, so that Mother Earth will also be there for us as human beings, right? And value the way that we organize, care about relationships, right? I think that's another principle that I would say. And all those things I have witnessed as a researcher and as a human being engaging in co-op and solidarity economic activism. I've witnessed that that's really what carries us. You know, I mentioned the research I was doing with incarcerated worker co-ops. That's right. That's the thing they talk about the most, is that relationship building. That the co-ops gave them an economic structure to build the kind of relationships that they hadn't had a chance to build in any other way, and was actually and the relationships that they were being deprived of, being behind bars, they were recreating all that, and co-ops helped them, allowed them to do that. And we do that again in the ways that women have stewarded the co-ops even, right? Because again, they understand that democratic participation. How do we make decisions together, right? I don't have to be the leader that's a hierarchical leader. I'm a leader because I know how to create other leaders and pull people together and bring people together so that we can do things for the common good and for the good of the whole. And if you look at the ways that we have been able to do that, especially again through cooperative solidarity economics, those have been the goals, right? Which is to help. We're doing things that will not just help us, that by helping ourselves, we're helping everybody. And we're also doing things that are solving the problems of the traumatizing worlds that we've been thrown into. And we're going to do something better as a group with other people because we have these other humane values that right now in this world we have to call Black feminist values, but they're really humane values. But because right now, right, everything is based on, you know, white supremacist, patriarchal, capitalist values, we have to find a different way to talk about it.
Yeah.
I don't
Thank
know if
you
I
for
answered
that.
every part of your
You
question.
did. You absolutely did. And I just want to say that I think we're in a very, um, I would say, perilous position um, with Black women and the roles that Black women have played. And I think because of the experiences that we're having, there is beginning to be this conversation really about Black women seeing, our roles and our paradigm as being a liability to us, right? And so you hear this conversation about, us no longer being part of supporting other people because at the end of the day, we need to just let them do what they gonna do. We should rest. We should, step away. And I just want to say that what I have come to the realization is that Black women and Black people need cooperatives and the cooperative as a value system more than ever, right? Because I think who we are is a gift and a blessing. And I think who we are is based on our structural position that we couldn't walk away. We were left there with the children, with the elders. We have been left to hold things which we have held. And that has been part of our socialization. And so we've been able to see the best in one another, right? Sweet Honey in the Rock has a song. There were no mirrors in my house. The mirrors was in my nana's eyes, right? We've had to be the one to see the intrinsic value in our children and our elders, right? And so I just want to say that I think we have to lean into that paradigm and not see it as a liability, right? Lean into our, approach to life and put it in a system that rewards that. And so I've been just saying more and more, Black women, Black people need to be in cooperatives to create that balance, that reciprocity, because I can't stop caring for the world. To stop caring for the world is to stop being who I am. And I don't want to stop caring, right? I just want to care in a way that is reciprocal and reparative and regenerative. And that's why I think we need to be in co-ops more and not less. So thank you for that. And so just to make the connection, this is the last of these workshops. So we have been part of a great tradition. And last week, Aaron Aaron Robertson and Stacey Sutton, who we both admire, spoke for the Black Trust and the Chuck Turner Arts and Lecture Series. And one of the key points of that conversation in that discussion about the ecosystems and the importance of interlocking parts, community, and economy to establish a new world, right? So thinking about these ecosystems, right? Not just co-ops here, co-ops there, but how we're creating ecosystems, right? So what are the past ecosystems or the present ones that you have looked at and we can look to build towards, right? For us, by us, right? So what are some of those kind of inspirational places and examples that you want to highlight for us?
Yeah, I've really loved this language about ecosystems, and I've been using it more and more. Um, the first one, I guess, that really made me think about an ecosystem as I was doing the research was from Renee Hatcher's hometown, Gary, Indiana, in the 30s. I just forgot the name of it, but it's okay. I'll remember it in a second. Cooperative trading company, I think it is, something like that. Anyway, they have sort of all the elements of what we've been talking about. The first thing is it's the Great Depression. The last bank branch leaves their neighborhood. They've got nothing, no bank anymore. They don't have a grocery store. They don't have a gas station. Most of them don't have jobs. They don't know what to do. Some of the Black teachers from the Black high school come together to talk about what can they do as a community, right? They start a study group. They start to study cooperative strategies. They start a buying club. The buying club turns into a co-op grocery store. They start a credit union. In the next year, they start a co-op gas station, right? The study group keeps going. In fact, Consumers Cooperative Trading Company, thank you so much, Maury. I can't believe I couldn't get that off my tongue. And what's so fascinating about that, so it has all the elements that I usually talk about, right? The starting with a study group, people coming together. What's the problem? What's the solution? Let's learn the solution together and build, right? But they also don't just stop with a grocery store, right? They also realize they want a credit union, right? They need to control the finances and keep finances in their neighborhood. They need a gas station. They actually opened a second grocery store. So that's not a huge ecosystem, but a small ecosystem got them through the Great Depression, right? But then you also read most of what we know about that co-op is from one of the co-founders, Jacob Reddix, who wrote a little article about it once that took me years to find, but I finally found it. And he also wrote about it in his memoir. It turns out he goes on after he does this, he turns down the job to be the first director of the self-help co-op initiative that FDR is starting to become president of Jackson State University. But at least we have his memoirs and his article. And in that article, he says that if it wasn't for the Black women in the co-op, that the co-op never would have gotten as far as it went or lasted as long as it did. The women kept the study circle going and created a women's guild. When things were looking bad, they brought everyone back to study some more and figure out what was going wrong to resurrect stuff. They kept everything going. And so he says not only was the education component important, and they actually started two courses, one introduction to co-ops and one on co-op management. But he said, right, if the women hadn't been there, taken charge and stayed steady, right, they never would have had that whole ecosystem together. So that's one of the reasons I love that example, because it has all these pieces, and a Black man talking about how important Black women were to the organization is amazing. So that's a really important one. Also during the 30s and more rural setting, we've got oh God, my brain, I'm getting old, Assata.
You've just been traveling, Dr. Jessica. Don't have anything. Dr. Jessica's coming back from a trip. So just describe, because
North
we all read
Carolina.
your book.
North Carolina, Oh gosh. Anyway, it started
Industrial
with two,
Commons?
sorry, what?
Industrial Commons, maybe? No.
Oh, no, sorry, I was going back to the 30s. But yeah, the Industrial Commons is another great ecosystem, right? And doing the recycling, right? So textiles, fabric recycling, and now they're also doing education with the high school students and that kind of thing in the Western North Carolina. This was in Eastern North Carolina with the bricks. And Terrell County
Brick
School, two
Rural
Black
Life School.
independent schools. Right.
Brick Rural
Brick
Life
Rural
School
Life
for
School.
Marie.
Yeah. So they started in the 30s. They were teaching cooperative economics to the parents as well as the children. They were helping to start credit unions and farm co-ops. It turned out down the road of about 30 miles was Terrell County, was another independent Black school. They were doing similar. So they joined together and formed the Eastern Carolina Association of Co-ops and Credit Unions, which then became a statewide Carolina Council, I think, of credit unions and co-ops. And for them, again, the same thing. So they were doing the education piece. They started credit unions wherever they could, farm co-ops, supply co-ops. And then what they did was they realized that education was so important. They had a group that started to create manuals and workshops to help people start credit unions and co-ops in North Carolina. Among Black folks. But once they got a statewide coalition, they actually were able to get money from the State Department of Agriculture to help them do the workshops and circulate the manuals that they were creating, so that within a 10-year period, they had created like 90 credit unions among Black folks and 20 other co-ops throughout just the state of North Carolina. So again, anchoring with education, but also anchoring with credit unions and other forms of co-ops to address whatever the local problems were, and then interconnecting them. So it's really interesting, I think, to see how it's not just the pooling of resources to do one thing, but the pooling of resources and knowledge, experience, and wisdom to continue to keep doing it, to build out. So you do one co-op, but then you do another interlocking co-op, another kind of co-op. The group in Gary actually ended up having Black folks from all over the country came to study what they did. So there's a group in Richmond who went and studied what the Gary people did and went back to Richmond and started doing the same thing. Chicago, Ohio, so all kinds of interconnections. We see what's happening and we work together. The other kind of ecosystem I'll just quickly mention is back to my Puerto Rico and the incarcerated worker co-ops there. Those worker co-ops, and there were 5 of them. I mostly studied one, but there were 5 before COVID. The more I tried to figure out what was going on there and what kind of supports they had, the more I realized that it was because the Puerto Rican co-op ecosystem was supporting these worker co-ops behind bars. And what I mean by that is from the Puerto Rican League of Cooperatives to the credit unions, to the insurance co-ops and other groups, they all helped these fledgling worker co-ops behind bars by, providing free education. They also provided customers. The artist co-op that I studied, most of the people they sold their art to were in co-ops. They got invited to co-op annual meetings, and the Puerto Rican League of Co-ops would invite them to sell their stuff at their meetings. They got equipment donated from other co-ops. There was a cafe co-op. These were incarcerated guys who were allowed to go down the street outside the prison gates to run a cafe every day. And where did they get their equipment? They got their equipment from other co-ops that donated it to them. Co-ops gave them money to start up, and then they sold. I asked them like what they made, like did they know how to make pastry and stuff? They said, oh no, we made sandwiches, but we bought the pastries from co-ops in Puerto Rico and sold them at our cafe. They also sold the wares of the women's co-op behind bars, sewing and candy crafts. They would sell those women's stuff in their cafe. So there were all these interlocking systems. And that's to me what an ecosystem means, right? So you have both the finance, the information, the skills, sharing, as well as these interlocking co-ops that help each other and support each other.
Thank you for that. And I know it's time that we move to questions. And I just want to say to that point, even about the ecosystem, and I want to really just lift up Boston Ujima, because I think they really are exemplifying a principle that the National Association of Black Cooperators have really been highlighting, and that's Ubuntu, right? I am because we are, therefore I am. And so I think in thinking about like this ecosystem and thinking about the interlocking pieces and parts, it's really having a vision that includes someone's places other than our particular organization, our particular co-op, right? Our particular needs, right? Seeing our vision for what we want to encompass and include others. And also understanding that we're dependent, right? We do it because we are Ubuntu, right? There is no escaping, right? There is no creating some little space where your business can be successful and your co-op can thrive, right? We're impacted by these systems, and our success depends on the prosperity, the revitalization, the redevelopment of our communities, right? I think part of this is getting away of the notion that we are isolated and we can't make it on our own. And I think as we think about this, right, how do we build the systems to support more cooperation? And then I'm going to finally say, as we open it up for questions, Dr. Jessica has always been really insistent to remind us that cooperation is a behavior and a value. It's not a business formation, right? That is from the Western perspective, right? So this is a behavior. So what we're asking ourselves, whether we're organized as a co-op or not, whether we work in the cooperative space or not, right? How are we supporting solidarity? How are we supporting shared resources? How are we supporting collaboration, cooperation, right? How is that Ubuntu, the spirit of Ubuntu, showing up in our work and in our visions of the world? So thank you, Dr. Jessica, for always giving us a practical application and also an understanding that we can create Black utopias because we already have, right? We're not doing anything new. We're only walking the path of our ancestors that have been laid so perfectly for us through the book Collective Courage. And Collective Courage is a book. It's supposed to be a study guide that leads to implementation of some things. And Dr. Jessica has some curriculums to go with it. And so it's supposed to be a living document. And I just want to say, if you read it 2 or 3 times and you're not in a co-op, we need to talk, right? Because at some point, that information should be so compelling that it moves us into action. And with that being said, I'd like to open it up for questions.
Okay, I'm just gonna, while you find someone to ask a question, let me just say 2 things that you made me think of when you said all that, right? The other thing that to me was so fascinating about this research is not just to see that people were doing this, right, building relationships and values, right, behavior and values, and creating economics based on relationships, but also that it made the economics stronger, right? It didn't detract from the asset building, from the income generation, right? It actually made our asset building work, our income generation work stronger. So these structures, again, the capitalists try to tell us it takes too long to make decisions with other people. It does this, it does that, but actually they last longer. They're able to pivot better. They're longer, stronger, more healthy organizations that are based on relationship building and caring. And that kind of thing. So I wanted us to also, we're not talking about lesser things, we're actually talking about better structures, creating better, stronger, more long-lasting structures that are better for human beings and better for Mother Earth. So I think that's really important. And then I just wanted to make a plug. I actually have a new edition of my book is finally coming out. They said November 26th. The 10th anniversary edition, which has a new preface by me. So just wanted to make sure we also mention that.
Absolutely. Let's just make sure that, that one sells as well and better. than the original one. And
I don't know if it could
absolutely,
ever sell better than the original. You all
it
have made that
can, Dr.
original.
Jessica.
uh,
It will. It will. We have a whole new generation. It absolutely will. We're more prepared. We got a stronger ecosystem. It absolutely will. It's our duty to do so. So just wanted to give a moment for questions. Any questions from anybody?
Can we first just, if people can just come off mute real quick and just, this was fantastic. Just whatever applause, whatever people would like to give. This was great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Assata. Assata, we're gonna contact you. You're gonna do a commercial. We'll talk about it.
I'm ready for my
she's
commercial for
great.
Boston.
I've been wanting to have this conversation with Assata for a long time, so thank you for letting us do this.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. It's an honor. So I do want to say, as if someone has a question, we welcome it. But I want to also say what you said. As someone that's working in the ecosystem, so I work with We're the One Solidarity Cooperative, and my nonprofit first started developing co-ops, and then the cooperative incubator accelerator came into existence. And I just want to say, as someone that's been head of a nonprofit for 10 years, I have 5 children. I chair the board of several organizations, that cooperation brings joy. It just does. Like I think, to what you said, Dr. Jessica, there is nothing more joyful. And I understand what Ella Baker was saying now. What she was saying about shared leadership, what she was saying about the joy of bringing other people into the work, right? Helping them find their own leadership. There is nothing more joyful than having that space to work in collaboration. And I do think we're suffering from isolation and a feeling of aloneness and a feeling of separation. And co-ops allow you to really work together with people who really see you and who can value you, but also can share the collective work and responsibility so that you can have a fuller life, right? So that after this call, I can go to my son's basketball practice, right? Like, that's the life I want. We're not creating a world somewhere out there for other people. I do this fundamentally because I needed something different, because I was dying on the inside, right? Because I was feeling disconnected from myself and my purpose. And I did this to find my way back to me. And finding my way back to myself, I got to find my way to some amazing people who I would have never known if we weren't in this work of cooperation, right? And so I say that Dr. Jessica is right, and it's joyful. And Black joy is a valuable commodity. And in cooperatives, we have an abundance of it. So, with that being said, we have a question from AJ. How can we get this knowledge back into our HBCUs? And some of that work is definitely happening at Spelman. I'll just let you know. No economics or Black studies major should go without this knowledge and history. Dr. Jessica, you want to take that on, and I can
Yeah, I love that. I absolutely agree with you. I've actually written about how important it is to teach this kind of stuff, especially to Black students, Black and Brown students. In the 1940s, I actually found an article that someone did. They found that, I believe it was 25 different HBCUs were teaching at least something about cooperatives in the 1940s. I tried to figure out how I could kind of reproduce that study, but I couldn't find it. But we do know, you said Spelman, Morehouse is starting to do it. Tuskegee is starting to do it. I don't know about Howard. Howard's a hard one. I know that, what is it? In Texas, Prairie,
Prairie View University. I'm working with them on a
right. Are
carbon.
you working with them?
Yeah,
Because I know
I
they were trying to
am.
do a community development and some other things, so they're starting to do some. I'm glad you're
Yeah,
working with them.
yeah.
And so how to get it how to get it to them, you know, it's hard because they're also struggling, right? They're struggling to prove that they can be a regular university. So it's hard for them sometimes to do stuff that's irregular. On the other hand, sometimes they're able to, either with some funding or with help of consultants. I think we just have to keep pushing it. Usually things happen like this, curricular things like this happen if you can get the student body to demand stuff. So that's another thing I think we would need to work on, is figure out which places we could get the students to say, we have to have this curriculum. We want a course, we want a certificate in this. There's lots of us who are willing to work on it, and some other places that have certificates in cooperative economics, like actually UMass didn't have it when I was there. But luckily, about 10 years ago, some people they have a certificate in community cooperative economics. Some other places do too. So I think we've got to just get, yes, another university is possible. We've got to get the word out. Coppin State, yeah. Now Coppin State also was one of those in the 30s. The president of Coppin State was one of the people who went on the study tour to the Antigonish movement in Nova Scotia. And he wrote about it in the Journal of Negro Education. He wrote about his experiences meeting Father Cody and learning about the Antigonish movement. But I don't know how much, yeah, they're still doing, they're getting a makerspace, yeah. But their new president should know, right, that in the 30s, their president, 39, I think it was 1939, that trip to Antigonish, that was another just small piece of information I was able to unearth at one point. So
And I just
it's
want to say
another
what you
strategy we can work on.
and I want to say what you said though, but because what did Ella Baker said, the youth have the courage where we fail. And I
Right.
think like social change and movements have been fueled by young people. And I think again, Black Studies departments or, the one at Penn State was really important. That's where Lakeisha and I met, right? Where we had our Sankofa circles, right? And so, I think looking for institutions, that's why we like co-ops, may not be where the leadership is going to come from, right? But students, and again, I'm so excited. We're going to, start doing some co-op education in our community. And again, the Panthers taught us this, right? So, Huey was getting his PhD, right? But he was doing political education and things in the community, right? So again, I think we need to look at many different strategies and look at ourselves as part of these movements, right? And building this. And it really does start by being local. And Dr. Jessica, I wanted something else you said, being consistent. It's going to take time, starting where we are and continuing to build these networks and attending like the National Black Cooperative Agenda Conference that happens every year, right? So those are ways where we can kind of start doing this planning, the strategizing, because it takes organizing, which Boston Ujima knows. It takes organizing to really have transformative change. It's not going to happen if we don't organize and engage and build movement. Right. So nothing is going to happen without a movement. So let me just say that we're not going to have some conversation with somebody and they're going to say, yes, I agree, and it's going to happen. We're going to really have to build a movement for these things to happen. So thank you for that. Any more questions that I'm missing in the chat? And anybody can help me because I know we're running up to time. A last question, anyone? Sierra,
There's something about
Mm-hmm.
the role of smaller institution building in the context around this work. What's that? Right. I see Ujima as an educational space outside of the academy. Wonder about the role of smaller institutions building the context around this work through conversations like this. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think not looking, we have a university that's a gentrifier. So I think not looking for universities who have complicated politics, but looking for faculty members that we can align with as students. I'm sorry, Dr. Jesse, you were going to say something.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say that notion, I think, Ujima, you're already doing it. And I think some other, right, we've got a lot of actually Black and brown co-op development organizations and co-op, right, cooperation Dayton, cooperation New Orleans, cooperation Jackson, right? A lot of places are coalescing around some of these issues and trying to have like a communiversity, right? Community and university connections. And I think we can do more of that. We can have more of these kinds of discussions. Again, the idea is not just to sit around and talk, but to talk so we can do. And that's the thing that gets me excited, right? That we talk together and we dream together, because that's what's going to help us to actually do things together. And in the end, right, it's what we do that matters even more than what we talk about or dream about. But we have to talk and dream in order to get to the doing.
And I want to finally just say, you know, one of my Black people learn to read in the South through Sunday schools, right? I learned how to communicate, analyze, you know, debate in Sunday school. If you ever want to credit the way I talk or the way I express myself, you thank Sunday school in East Texas for it. And so I think thinking about freedom schools, Saturday schools, you know, again, you know, I just want to emphasize not looking to the institutions, right, but providing these and making connections from these institutions where Black students are and other students are, and making sure they have relationships with community. And I actually think it's best if this happens in conjunction with communities, which gives us some more independence and agencies. And I'm a person that teaches at a university, and I'm advocating for, you know, agency outside of institutions that have a lot of control, specifically in Texas, you know, that you can't say certain things, right? So again, we can operate in spaces where we have greater freedom. So I just want to thank you, everybody. This is the end of this workshop. Thank you, Dr. Jessica, for making time for us. Thank you, Dr. Jessica, for practicing cooperation. Like, as your living work. You don't just write about it. And you're so generous. You know, like cooperation among cooperatives. You were on calls late at night in Crenshaw in California. I remember that. And you have such a generous spirit. So thank you for not writing, but doing and showing and being the light. Thank you, Boston Ujima, for showing us what institutions and organizations can do and stretching your knowledge and your care beyond Boston into the world. We are better for it. And so thank you tonight for allowing me to host and to be in conversation with Dr. Jessica Gordon Nembhard, who is really the Northern Star of the fourth wave of Black cooperation in the United States and in the world. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Assata. It's so wonderful to be in conversation with you. And thanks, everybody. Thanks, Nia, and everybody at Ujima for having us. We really appreciate it.